to the wreck, if you like, and looked at what was there to see. We're going to just do a quick look at the chronology. I think you can all read the screen, but she had a fairly successful period sinking UK merchant ships in the South Atlantic and um, Western Indian Ocean. And she was scuttled off Montevideo, as probably most of you know. And sadly, her captain Langsdorff committed suicide. I think it was on December the 20th. So we're really going to cover the three or four lines below that, the visitors to the wreck. And just to recap, the eighth victim of the Spey, the Tyroa, we're lucky that the Falkland Museum has a album of photographs taken by a seaman on board the Graf Spee. And this came up for auction 3 or 4 years ago, I think, after the poor chap died. And this is the torpedo hit on the Tyroa. The Spey approached her head on very fast. The Tyroa had no idea what she was, but suspected she was a pocket battleship. She had a dummy funnel, that's a Graf Spee, that is, a dummy funnel, a dummy gun turret, and in the end, she was dispatched with a torpedo. Couldn't seem to shoot her. She couldn't seem to sink her with the guns. And this is another one from the Sailors' album in the Falkland Museum. The Graf Spee coming into Montevideo after the Battle of the River Plate, quite badly damaged. There's not obvious damage to her, perhaps, but she had a large hole in her port bow, and the desalination plant, the galleys, the fire control equipment had been damaged quite badly. And she was running out of ammunition, as were actually the British ships, but the British had reinforcements on the way. The white markings on the bow and amidships are, I think the British nicknamed them moustaches, but they were designed to give an impression that the ship was going along at a high speed. So there she is going into Montevideo. And just looking back, HMS Exeter, the lead British ship at the Battle of the River Plate, was really badly damaged, as you can see from these photos, courtesy of the Falkland Museum. She'd lost all her main armament, bridge was wrecked, and she limped back down to Stanley before the battle had actually finished. Well, the Graf Spee was in Montevideo for about 3 days, and briefly became a bit of a tourist attraction. She needed to have repairs done to her, and I think Langsdorff asked for 21 days, I think, but he was only allowed 3. And on the right there, you can see a souvenir of the battle, if you like, and a postcard on the left again, courtesy, thank you, Chloe, from the Falkland Archives, National Archives. The Graf Spee after the battle, well, they had 36 seamen dead, sadly. And on the right, you can see the hole in her port bow. And this is her afterwards. She's been scuttled. Several charges, explosive charges, have been let off, if you like. And she burnt and burnt and burnt for several days, at least a week, I believe. Prior to scuttling her, the Germans had smashed all her sensitive equipment, or nearly all the equipment, in fact, opened all the portholes, and the fire had caused a lot of damage to the ship, as you can imagine. I'll just look at a photo from the National Archives, British National Archives. As you might be to read, hopefully, there are 6 charges placed below the ship or in the lower parts of the ship. 5 of them went off, causing considerable damage. The ones on the stern led to the stern virtually being, or did actually blow the stern off. And unfortunately, in a way, the charge under the forward 11-inch turret, the forward big turret you can see, didn't go off. And this caused quite a bit of anxiety to the various visitors to the wreck from the British Navy and the American Navy. They just didn't want to go anywhere near the turret. And there are rumours, I've heard, that a British diver died while exploring the surrounds to the forward turret, but I don't think that's ever been proven. I know a search was done in the British cemetery. There were rumours in the Uruguayan press, but that's never really been established. And we're very lucky to have with us tonight, and I hope you don't mind me saying Ruth, if I can call you Ruth, Ruth Morton, who actually witnessed the Battle of the River Plate from Shoreline and came out on a boat trip as an 11-year-old. And we're just very lucky to have two rare pictures from her family's collection. This one shows a rather lumpy stern to the ship. The stern had really been blown off or blown upwards by the explosion underneath, and you can see the funnel is leaning to starboard. So these are pictures. Thank you so much, Ruth, for sending them. And this is the boat you were on. Must have got a bit closer up. And features here. I mean, so many of you will be experts on naval architecture, but at the top of the control tower with the two bits poking out is the huge rangefinder for the 11-inch guns. Up above there is probably some radar equipment. It was so secret, and the British Navy had no radar at all at this time. But it was so secret that when she came into port, normally canvas was put over it, and but we'll cover the radar a bit later. So we're going to look at some of the sources here, and there are some really great books about the Battle of the River Plate and the Graf Spee. The one on the left is by, or has been compiled by a leading figure in the Graf Spee saga, Eugene Millington Drake. And he was the British officer or quasi ambassador in Montevideo at the time. And to be fair to him, he did play a big part in playing a game of deception with the Graf Spee, hinting that there were big British ships outside waiting for them when there was no such thing. And also actually orchestrating the purchase of the Graf Spee wreck from the German to his German counterpart in Montevideo. The point, though, about that book, which was, I think, published 1964, and the one on the right by the gunnery officer on the Graf Spee, is there's no mention of the covert missions that I'm going to cover in my talk tonight. Maybe partly because they didn't know anything about them, but partly because a veil of secrecy was placed over them at the time, and the information has only gradually been released. So first of all, this hasn't really been mentioned very much, but the first visitor to the Graf Spee wreck was the ensign George Sampson from the USS Helena. The USS Helena was on what's called a shakedown cruise from the States, and she was going down the coast of South America. And while she was in Montevideo, Ensign Sampson, I've read reports that he swam out to the Graf Spee. Maybe he was a particularly good swimmer, but I believe it's 4, 5, 6 miles out to the wreck. But here's just a picture of the Helena. So that's George Sampson on the right. He was an ensign, which I believe is quite a junior rank in the US Navy. But he took it upon himself to get out to the wreck and take some really good photographs. The one on the left top is not particularly good, but on the bottom left, you'll see he did some rather childlike drawings of the Graf Spee wreck, which we'll look at a bit more closely in a moment. So this is a picture he took looking forward at the bows of the Graf Spee. And I would suggest he has a really good camera for those days anyway, because the British photos, equivalent photos, are grainy pictures, and they've yellowed a lot with the passage of time. I don't know whether, I mean, maybe he came from a wealthy family and he could afford a good camera, or maybe the US Navy, more likely the US Navy or Secret Service supplied him with this camera. Who knows? Why it was him who did it? Maybe he was a good swimmer. That occurred to me today. And just a few more pictures of his that he took on the Graf Spee. They quite often feature on the internet and in some of the books, but haven't really been able to find out very much about Sampson, except sadly he died in battle later in the war in 1945, by which time he was a pilot. So all a bit of a mystery. And this is a little bit of a topsy-turvy picture, but very crisp of the Graf Space funnel, big searchlight there. And we'll see in a minute the Royal Navy chose to take one of the searchlights back to the UK for examination. This is not such a good picture, but it's looking back over that steel bar, if you like, with holes in it, which is the aircraft catapult for the seaplane, the Graf Spee carried. But actually, you'll see there's very little left of the stern. By this time, it had sunk down onto the seabed. This is February the 2nd, 1940. So where are we? About 6 weeks after the Graf Spee was scuttled. So I've shown this picture and similar to a few friends. I thought it looked quite childlike, the sort of picture my 5-year-old grandson might do. But actually, when you look at it, it's not that bad. I think it must have been done in a bit of a hurry. And some friend of mine said, well, Americans always have really bad handwriting. But I think the main features are there to be seen. Perhaps he could have tidied it up, or it could have been tidied up when he returned to the States. And this is not a terribly good picture of one of the hits on the Graf Spee control tower. And if you can read it, it says large enough for somebody to crawl through. So one of the hits on the Spee. We'll look at those later because the Royal Navy had a really close look at the 8 hits they were able to examine. So there are quite a few existing sources, but I've been lucky in the last few years to study at Newcastle University. I'm quite old, but when I retired, I decided I wanted to go and study a bit. And then Newcastle University had a wonderful archive, the Marine Technology Special Collection, and it has the records of quite a few shipbreakers. And one of the 2 leading shipbreakers at this time in 1940 was T.W. Ward, Thomas W. Ward. And they have a file, curiously, on the Graf Spee, because the people who went out to inspect the wreck from the Royal Navy all pretended to come from T.W. Ward. They all pretended to be scrap dealers, shipbreakers, if you like. And so T.W. Ward have got quite an interesting file, which I'm not aware has been looked at too closely, apart from perhaps by Dr. Ian Buxton, who was largely responsible for compiling the collection. The one in the middle is, I plopped it in this morning, the Defence Electronics History Society. I discovered through their chairman, I think Phil Judkins, that in their newsletter they've had a number of articles on the Graf Spee. So although I've tended to rely on primary sources, original documents, they have some interesting commentary on the Graf Spee's radar in particular. And some older sources revisited. Knowing I had to do this talk, I went back to the National Archives at Kew, and on the left there you can see one of the 3 big reports that were done by the Royal Navy representatives in April 1940. I say Royal Navy, but I know that the person doing the report was from the Royal Corps of Naval Constructors, which I'm not sure is part of the Navy. On the right is part of the Graf Spee radar, which has been preserved at Yeovilton, of all places. We'll come back to that later. And there was some, I believe the rule now is 20 years, but it used to be 30 years for opening up UK government files for public viewing. But there was some hesitation in releasing the 1940 reports by the Royal Corps of Naval Constructors. I think that, honestly, part of that is because, as we'll see later, the commentary by the visiting representative of the Corps had some quite frank comments on local Uruguayans and local British representatives like the ambassador or government officer Millington Drake. but clearly there was some hesitation at releasing the documents. And there are sources, really good sources in the Falklands, which I've explored. The photo album I've mentioned, a great display on the River Plate at the Falkland Museum. The Jane Cameron National Archives have been helpful, particularly on the worry about the number of German settlers in Argentina who might be tempted to help recover the Falklands or invade the Falklands. And Falklands did have links to the battle. The 3 ships involved for the Royal Navy all visited Stanley frequently, and there were 2 Falkland Islanders among their crew. So the Graf Spee wreck, a state-of-the-art German ship, there were opportunities for the Royal Navy. If there was a chance to board the ship, inspect it, or even purchase it. A very modern ship, pocket battleship, welding, radar, diesel engine armament, and also anyone could look at the damage caused by our shell fire, or being a bit unkind, the lack of damage in some cases. So the Admiralty tried to decide whether the Graf Spee wreck would be acquired. I think the majority view followed Mr. Goodall, the Director of Naval Construction. You could read his comments. And he also looked back to the First World War, or just after the First World War, when, as some of you may know, the German fleet scuttled itself at Scapa Flow, and a lot of papers were recovered, which were of great use from the scuttled ships, according to Goodall anyway. I'm sure he was right. Some hesitation from others. The ship was sunk, really. It wasn't possible to go below decks. And so examination of the diesel machinery wouldn't really be possible. But the Navy, he commented, might be interested in the RDF. Well, RDF is, I think, radio direction finding. It's what we called radar at that time. I think the Americans rechristened it radar. None of the UK ships, none of the Royal Navy had radar or anything like it at the time. And there was a lack of knowledge of how much the Germans knew. So just one other sad picture of the Graf Spee. And here another slightly blurred copy, sorry, but a picture of how the wreck initially settled on the bottom when it was scuttled, how it started to sink in the mud, and how it started leaning over to starboard. And then eventually there was a dreadful storm in mid-April, the worst storm in living memory, and the ship sort of fell virtually entirely into the mud, if you like, and tipped right over. So visits by the Royal Navy and other investigators became very difficult after that. So what became this Project 6160, for goodness knows what reason, I've just categorized 3 UK visitors, radar, you can read naval constructors, and scrap dealers. As I said, they all pretended to be scrap dealers. They were provided with documentation confirming they were employees of T.W. Ward or seconded from them or whatever. And I should say, to be fair, that on radar, I find it a bit hard to believe, but the chap Lieutenant Toby Harper on HMS Achilles at the Battle of River Plate spotted the Graf Spee's radar at some distance. He was a bit of a boffin in radar himself. The Achilles was a New Zealand ship, of course, and when he went back, he designed some rudimentary radar with the help of others for the Achilles.
If you weren't over there.
I'll come over there.
Can you not hear me? Sorry.
Yeah, in a minute, yeah.
Hello? Oh, okay. I'll carry on unless no one can hear me.
Oh, it's just starting. Oh, dear God.
Okay. Right.
I don't know why it says known at Porter on it. It should say right.
Sorry, I'll carry on speaking. I can hear somebody commenting. Is that okay, Graham? Yeah. Okay. Well, this is one of the secondment letters from T.W. Ward, the shipbreakers, confirming that Bainbridge Bell, Purvis, and Kilroy were all representatives of them. It was designed to make it less obvious to the Germans that the British were investigating, we were investigating, to unveil the secrets of the ship. And I think I lost a little bit there. I'm so sorry. I should explain that in late February 1940, the Royal Navy actually acquired the wreck of Graf Spee through a nominee, a chap called Vega, a bit of a wheeler dealer by all accounts. But it became clear that the German representative in Montevideo, with appropriate commission, bribery, or whatever, was prepared to sell the ship for up to £20,000. In the end, £14,000 was paid, £2,000 commission to the German representative, and 200 to the I think the German Chamber of Commerce. It was quite a coup, really, but the whole thing was hidden. There was no formal legal documentation saying the Admiralty were the real owners or the real beneficial owners. It was all dressed up as being an acquisition by Vega for the purposes of breaking up the ship. And I should say Vega was described by the British ambassador or officer in Montevideo as being a reformed gangster, if you can understand what I'm saying. Anyway, so first UK visitor in early February 1940 was Le Boucherie Bainbridge Bell. Some of you may have heard of him. He was the sort of number 2 in the UK on radar development. I will abbreviate to the name he's known by, what's known by by his friends, which was BB. So if I call him BB, I hope you don't mind. He had quite a life. He'd won the Military Cross in the First World War. He was one of the leading assistants, or the leading assistant to Watson Watt, who was developing radar. And he was chosen to go out and look at the Graf Spee's radar. Like all of these people, he went on a hush-hush basis. So first of all, he travelled to Paddington Station. He met representatives of MI5, who had got lots of documentation for him, but they'd done it all in the name of Cambridge Bell, not Bainbridge Bell, which caused a bit of an upset, if you like. But he flew out to Buenos Aires, then came across to Montevideo and boarded the wreck on several occasions. It's very sad to see that, as far as I can tell, his report fell on deaf ears. It was conveniently filed away, one commentator said. I think I've seen it said that it was looked at, but it was just noted the Germans were well ahead of us, and we didn't learn very much, or the British didn't learn very much from his report on the Graf Spee. And it took a raid on a German coastal battery in Feb 42 to get much more information, a commando raid. But by 1941, most larger Royal Navy ships had radar, as shown by the victory at the Battle of Matapan. 3 Italian ships sunk. They had no idea the British were there. The British had radar, the Italians didn't. And BB features in a film which I've yet to watch about the development of radar. It stars Eddie Izzard as Watson Watt. I bought the DVD and we'll look at it sometime, but it features BB and his team. And this is one of BB's drawings. I might have explained that he climbed up to the top of the control tower. You might have seen from the photos I've shown that it was listing away, leaning away. It must have been quite difficult for him, because I think he must have been in his late 50s by then. But he faithfully went up and brought down some bits of the radar installation at the top of the control tower. He put them where he thought they'd be safe, next to his Uruguayan guard, stacked up against a safe place. But when he came down with more radar equipment from the top of the control tower, the equipment was missing, and the Uruguayan guard explained that it had fallen in the sea. BB realised that wasn't the case, and it was clear the Uruguayan had just kicked the radar stuff into the sea, being a Nazi sympathiser, what would it be deduced he was. But he did some nice drawings of the radar on the Graf Spee. I'm afraid I'm not technical enough to be able to understand this one, but a slightly sharp character, even his obituary showed that he perhaps didn't take fools gladly. It's probably a bit unfair to show that, but he was quite an amazing chap. On his car immediately after the war, he had gauges showing petrol consumption and tyre pressure, so he was 50 years ahead of his time, maybe. And there are remnants of the Graf Spee radar at Yeovilton. You can go and see them if you want. I might do on a forthcoming trip to the West Country. But these are all ones that Bainbridge Bell brought back from the Graf Spee. The second group of visitors came from the Royal Corps of Naval Constructors and a Royal Navy diver torpedo fire control expert, Guy Kilroy. It's Purvis who wrote up all the reports afterwards, so we don't know a huge amount about Kilroy. But you can see Purvis's commentary about the type of ship, the pocket battleship type of ship that the Graf Spee was. And he could see a lot of weight had been saved to try and keep roughly within treaty obligations, but there was a price to be paid. Armor protection, for example, was poor. And she was meant to be swift enough to escape from anyone who could outgun her, but she wasn't quite. There were 3 or 4 British ships that could do that. He looked at the effect of shell hits on the Graf Spee and did a thorough inventory of the equipment on board. Just some examples here. I hope this shows up on your screens, but there were 8 hits that the Royal Navy investigators were able to look at, and they did detailed written reports, but probably best looked at by looking at these diagrams that were done. And I think it's in very small print if you're on a laptop, but I think it shows hit number 5 about halfway up the control tower. But they looked at this very carefully. But I think of the 8 shells that definitely hit the Graf Spee, it's thought that only 3 definitely exploded. The other 5 may just have caused superficial damage, splinters and that sort of thing. Not a good photo, I'm sorry, but the hit number 1, the shell just ricocheted off the armour on the forward 11-inch turret. And you can see here the ship is lower and lower in the water now. This is another one, just looking at how this went through the Admiral's Bridge. I think this was the one that rendered the Captain Langsdorff, unconscious. And another one here on the control tower. But quite a close review of the angle at which the shells approached, and a feeling that perhaps the British shells, could have been more, in layman's language, exploding on impact rather than going through the superstructure, which some did. And this is just one example of the drawings that Purvis did of Graf Spee equipment. Again, beyond my technical pay grade, I'm sure, but he did dozens and dozens of these drawings, and they went out many times to the wreck to do them. Purvis, I was lucky to speak to the well-known maritime archaeologist Menson Bound about Purvis. Purvis met Menson once and said he did speak his mind, but these are comments by Purvis in the report that was restricted at the National Archives for quite a while. As you can see, that he doesn't think much of Vega, the British minister, the British Poisson ambassador, and Deacon, who helped to unload a lot of the equipment from the ship. He didn't have much time for. But then he was a long way from home. He travelled, I don't know, 5,000-6,000 miles. Travelling those days wasn't easy. And he found a local, even many of the Uruguayans, not terribly cooperative all the time, although many were helpful. visitors 4 and 5. Well, unfortunately, Frederick Smith was never made it to Montevideo. He wasn't well when he got on the plane in the UK, and he decided he just must try to get to Montevideo. This was a matter of national importance. He really felt he should get there, help to front the operation, and but he died on the way at Rio de Janeiro of a duodenal ulcer, which must have been dreadfully painful. And he was replaced by a chap called Stanley Dial, who arrived a few weeks later. Their role, yes, to front the operation and to see what scrap value there was in the wreck. Bit of a pointless operation because although Vega, the nominee, had said it would be possible to refloat the ship, this seemed most unlikely when they got there. And I think recouping some of the purchase price of 14,000, I think Dial reckoned there was about £1,000 worth of scrap there. But they worked well together with Purvis and Kilroy. He estimated it would cost £500,000 to raise the Graf Spee. And in today's money, that must be a colossal figure. Just quickly comparing it with a British wreck, Warspite off Cornwall. Warspite did manage to get off the rocks, but even though it was thought impossible, but she was on stout Cornish rocks, not on mud, and the operation was successful. But with Graf Spee, it was hopeless. The SS Princesa doesn't feature often in the books on the Graf Spee, but she was a reefer, a refrigerated cargo vessel that went up and down between Montevideo and the UK. And her role was to take booty back from the Graf Spee for examination in the UK. It was taken as deck cargo and described to Uruguayan customs as being, what was it described as being? Scrap iron, I think was. And these are some of the larger items brought back to the UK. It must have been quite a job to get, say, the 4-inch gun, even if it didn't have the turret with it, off the Graf Spee, and the Uruguayan Navy kindly lent a floating crane to take it all off. But the Navy people only had it for a day. But the Princesa did bring back this stuff. And I was amazed to see, only yesterday actually, from the Defence Electronic History Society newsletter, that the gun survived at Devonport Dockyard till the 1970s. But close examination of all this was very helpful to the Royal Navy. And just briefly, because I'm getting a bit behind on time, first, no question of revealing the Graf Spee had been sold to Britain. It had to be stopped censorship, as we can see here. But on the left, you'll see that line that was followed. The contract was Vega and the German ambassador for ship breaking it up. And then there was lower down, you can see shipbreakers representatives from T.W. Ward. That line was followed. But on the right, if you can read it in May, I think this is the Daily Telegraph, so revealing that the secrets of the Graf Spee were being uncovered. So the work had been done, but I think to confuse the Germans a bit, they referred to things that weren't actually true. A gun that came up and down, and a floating armor plate device. I think was the purchase examination worth the cost? The Treasury raised the question, they're bound to, aren't they? Treasury raised the question in 1941. And I think a lot was learned about radar, but it wasn't really passed on to the people developing radar for the Air Force and the Army. Examination of the guns and the equipment was helpful, and also the effect of the shell hits. Who am I to say? But it does seem to have been worthwhile. And Purvis, from the Royal Corps of Naval Constructors, he said this to Menson Bound when they met, when Purvis was quite old and retired from the Navy, but he felt his role, Purvis's role in designing or helping to design much of the Royal Navy's fleet post 1945 was heavily influenced by the Graf Spee's design and the elegance of the Graf Spee as well. A slightly enigmatic comment, but interesting. So that's the end of that, but just some quick pictures. Menson Bound, many of you will know, dived on the with Uruguayan contacts. I think Hector Bardo is one of them, on the Graf Spee from the late 1990s, and brought up various items. The rangefinder on the right did have all the lenses on it, I think, but these quickly disappeared, sadly. I think souvenir hunters went for it. And there's a gun from the secondary armament. This was an eagle from the stern of the Graf Spee. And below it, although I've seen pictures, there is a big swastika. And the Uruguayan government, to the best of my knowledge, have said that they don't want this eagle and the swastika released in case it gets in the hands or gets sought after by Nazi revival people, if you like. So this is a closer picture of the rangefinder. You can see the circular gaps where the lenses would have been. I should say that the rangefinder was extremely useful. It could detect ships 50 kilometers away. And the radar, if it did work, and there's a lot of debate about how influential the radar was in the Battle of the River Plate, but if it did work, it could only do better than the rangefinder, possibly when it was nighttime or fog or smoke was in evidence. I think the vibrating diesel engines on the Graf Spee made the Seacat German radar not work as well as it should have done. And this again outside the Naval Museum in Montevideo, some of the secondary armaments on a nice sunny day. A rangefinder. And in the museum, the ship's bell from HMS Ajax. And over in New Zealand, they've actually kept one of the turrets, as you can see from Achilles, X-turret, I think it is. So that's a really quick run through of looking at the secrets of the Graf Spee after she was scuttled. It's an awful lot of primary source information there to be looked at. And for example, the George Sampson, the US chap, there's more research to be done there in particular, whether the US Navy followed up his findings. So I think, Graham, I'm just about running out of time. So here's just a list of some of the people who've been very helpful. I'm sure I've missed some people out, but they've all been very, very good to me, especially the special collection at Newcastle University, which got me interested in the Graf Spee with its big file on the big TW Ward file on the Graf Spee. And this is just, saying thanks very much. And thanks, Graham, for organising it all.
Well, my pleasure entirely, Richard. Thank you so much for a really fascinating 40 minutes or so. And very shortly, I'm going to open it up for questions. So feel free to unmute, folks. And I think you can either raise your hand digitally or in reality, or if you want, you can send a little message via chat. But Patty, if you're in particular, if you are unmuted, I just wanted to say hello to your mum, Ruth. And I'm sure you won't mind, Richard, if I just hand the spotlight over to Ruth for a minute. Ruth Morton witnessed the aspects of the whole crisis surrounding the Graf Spee. She was an 11-year-old girl in Montevideo at the time, and she's with us tonight. And Patty and Ruth, can you hear me okay? Can I just ask a question to Ruth? Would that be all right?
Yes.
Great. Oh, there you are. Ruth, lovely to see you again. Lovely to see you. Ruth, I'm just wondering, it's a story that you told me, but can you just share with us what it was like seeing the Graf Spee sailing out of Montevideo Harbour to, well, you didn't know what was going to happen. Can you recall that?
Well, I remember seeing her sail from the Lesa del Cerdo and rushing down to the Rambla to see her come out of the breakwaters. And then she seemed to stop. And she even seemed to come out of the channel and aim towards Montevideo. And then she blew up.
And I seem to remember that you were with your granddad, weren't you, your grandfather? And he said something which was amusing at the time.
Father was on the Rambla with my granddad, and my granddad, yes, he said, yes, he said, Cruz Diablo, meaning cross of the devil, or go to hell, Graf Spee.
And with that, she blew up. Was that right?
And that's, yes, she blew up then. And my grandfather was very shaken and he had to be taken home. Yes, my grandmother said, see what you've done now, Jack. Let's go home and have a drink.
And just one other question, Ruth. Not long after the Graf Spee was scuttled, I believe you went out. You were fortunate enough to have a sightseeing trip out there. What was that like?
It was fantastic. We were very, very close to her. We went in a tug, and the tug went all around her, and very close. It was very imposing. She was very tall still.
And she was still smoldering, so that must have been very soon afterwards, no?
Oh yes, yes. She was very hot still.
Mm. Mm. Ruth, a real delight to have you with us this evening. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Now, if people have questions for Richard, please do go ahead. And there is a facility whereby you can actually raise a little red digital hand, but you might just like to wave and I'll scan up and down the pictures because there are quite a few of you and I can't see everybody on the screen at the same time. But I'll look for people who have a digital or real hand up. And I will check the chat as well. So do unmute rather. And if I'm not seeing, oh, hang on, here's somebody. Lost you now. I did see somebody's hand up earlier and I'm afraid it's gone. Okay. So Hallam, question from Hallam Murray, a wonderful talk. Do you know where she was built? So Richard, I suppose, yes, a little bit about the origin of the ship would be helpful if you can.
Hey, my best knowledge is on the covert mission, so I may not know much more than other people. But I have got a book over the other side of the room on her construction, but completed 1936. I guess at Wilhelmshaven, but I'm guessing a bit. I think she was meant to be, please correct me if I'm wrong, but 10,000 tons, but she was actually 12 and a half. So, and 6 11-inch guns and 5.9, 4.1-inch guns, seaplane. The seaplane didn't perform very well. The diesels vibrated a lot if the ship went very fast in battle. I'm not answering your question, am I? But maybe somebody else has some knowledge of the background. I did read somewhere that initially the 3 pocket battleships were designed for operations in the Baltic, but that seemed unlikely given their incredibly long range.
Just a minute. Okay, hello?
Yeah, would anybody, if you can unmute, because I'm actually having trouble seeing everybody. So if you would like to unmute and just speak up and put your question, that'd be fine.
Richard, Mike Critchley here. I wrote, and it said, interested that the Admiralty purchased a wreck like this. Were other wrecks purchased at the time or even now?
I'm not aware of any. I mean, it seems a quite extraordinary thing to do, relying with the greatest respect on a slightly dubious local German minister who seemed to have the authority to sell the wreck. It does seem quite extraordinary, even if he was receiving bribes, commissions, or whatever you like to call it. But what other wrecks were bought? I can't think of any having been bought by the Admiralty, but it seems
Just a
extraordinary. I
thought.
mean, the Admiralty, yeah. I mean, I did see pictures of those 18-inch Japanese battleships, which I think were both lost in the war, but the Americans taking back one of their 18-inch guns for a close inspection. But that may have been a spare 18-inch gun. I wasn't able to get to the bottom of that. But interesting question, Mike.
Richard, this goes off the subject a little bit, but what, in your opinion, would have been Graf Spee's chances of actually making a run for it and getting out of the River Plate? And bearing in mind, I think she needed to get back to Germany for a refit. She probably wouldn't have been much good in battle. But did Hans Langsdorff make the right decision, do you think?
I think we talked about this before, didn't we, Graham? The British cruisers, there were only two of them there. Cumberland came along, didn't she? And she hadn't been in the battle and was quite a larger cruise than Ajax and Achilles. But I think that those two Ajax, Achilles had very little ammunition. There were no other big ships nearby. And she might have got away, but I don't really know. But she would never have got back to Germany with that hole in her bows and the lack of ammunition, the lack of fire control. But she might have got out of the River Plate, in my humble opinion. But it would be almost to an almost certain fate at the hands of larger Royal Navy ships. But
yeah, I'm sure I'm not the only one to find Hans Langsdorff quite an inspirational and honourable man, not just for the way that he treated all his prisoners, managing to, I think, sink 9 British ships with the loss of not a single British seaman, but also for making a pragmatic decision about saving the lives of his crew. I think quite a remarkable man. I mean, an utterly remarkable man to my mind, anyway. Neil Datson, would you like to put a question to Richard, please?
Yeah, okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, I think I better point out, because Richard did say that British ships hadn't got radar. In fact, radar was hit to HMS Sheffield in 1938.
okay.
And I mean, they were certainly, HMS Sheffield was the first British warship to have radar, but it was coming in, and it was certainly fitted on, as an early radar. I mean, obviously, all these early radars were, shall we say, questionable and took time to develop. But it's not actually true that there were no British ships with radar at the time.
Okay.
Sorry,
I didn't know that.
But I mean, I think it's only fair to point that out. But the other thing I just endorse, I can't imagine there would be much chance that Graf Spee to have got very far if she had got out of Montevideo, because I mean, the cruisers were faster than her. They could follow her if nothing else, and of course, bigger ships could be brought in time. I don't think she'd have got very. I mean, very difficult to say, isn't it? Of course, with her ammunition down too, which would be a problem. But that's mere speculation.
Of course, yes, that's all it can be. I think the Graf Spee I worked out had about 20 minutes of ammunition left, but
That's not much in a naval battle terms, is it?
no.
No. David Sneath, I think you raised your hand. Would you like to put a question?
Yeah, I hope you forgive me. Can you can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Yes, thank you.
Good. Yeah, my wife's telling me not to shout, so I'll go out the room. I'm sorry, but my communication, my Wi-Fi has been a bit sort of iffy. I don't know whether I missed the reference, the fact that Captain Langsdorff committed suicide in a Buenos Aires hotel wrapped in the flag of the Graf Spee.
I did say he committed suicide very briefly. I mean, I know it was a tragic and an important event in it all, but I did in the chronology. What flag was he wrapped in? Can you remind us?
It was the ship's flag, apparently. Yes, he brought it ashore with him. So yeah. I've already had correspondence, but for Ruth's benefit, my parents both came from the Argentine and were on separate Highland ships. Highland Princess in the case of my mother, and the Highland Patriot in the case of my father, coming south from the UK in late 1939. My mother took a photograph of, or a couple of photographs of the Graf Spee in Montevideo, and my father, I suspect, probably went out from Buenos Aires on a joyride to look at the wreck. And I do remember as a child seeing a photograph that he probably took of the wreck as it smoldered in the River Plate. So that's part of my background. And he took me to see the 1956 film, The Battle of the River Plate, at a Nottingham cinema in about that year, 1956, when I would have been 8. So just a bit of historical detail to add to the collection.
Oh, interesting. Thank you. Somebody raised the issue in an email with me about the Falkland Island Company ship, the Fitzroy, and how the Graf Spee had ignored her and didn't fire on her when she came into the River Plate estuary. And I suspect, I believe that to be the case, but I suspect, sorry, I'm changing the subject slightly, but I suspect that was because she was very short of ammunition and wasn't going to waste it on a small merchant ship. But I know Chloe and her colleague have done some really good research in the Falkland National Archives and have sent some copies of Falkland Press, Falkland newspaper stuff to try and ascertain the truth of that episode.
Yes, I think it would be the crew on board the little Fitzroy, which I heard my parents talking about traveling on frequently, would have been a little bit perturbed to see a pocket battleship hauling up over the horizon, even if it was just for the crew to wave at them and then steam on. But it was very interesting to know. Yeah. Good. So I'm just checking yes. Hugh, can you hear me? Would you like to add a point, put a question? Hugh? I'm texting him, rather messaging him here because I don't think he can hear me. Hugh, can you hear me?
I can see.
Can we see Hugh? He may be muted. Let me see if I can find Hugh because I think he may well be muted. He is muted. Ask to unmute, or I can unmute him perhaps. No, I can only ask him to unmute. In fact, can I ask everyone to unmute, please?
I can see, Graham, that Patty Morton has asked whether Vega was Uruguayan in the chat.
Yes.
And
Do we
to the
know
best of my
anything?
knowledge,
Yeah.
he was, yes.
Right.
I can confirm that.
Thank you.
So,
He sounded a bit shifty.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. I tell you what struck me. I smiled wryly when I heard that so many people were heading for the River Plate under the guise of scrap metal merchants. And I thought, what does that remind me of? You know, it's clearly quite a popular sort of smokescreen for people
Yes,
who
they
are
are
involved in
Argentinians,
skullduggery.
yes.
The Falklands and South Georgia came to
If
mind
I could-
immediately.
May I come back? Another little point occurred to me about and especially referring to the Falkland ship not being fired on in the estuary, which I take it was still outside territorial waters. There was no issue about that, was there?
My contact doesn't think so. I don't mean to disagree with him really, but he felt the Graf Spee wouldn't want to sink a ship like the Fitzroy because it did such a valuable role.
Yeah, quite possibly not. I'm just thinking that may have been an issue, the territorial waters.
It could have been, and it more
I mean,
as likely the fact that the Graf Spee was short on ammunition and didn't want to waste it when the
there
cruisers
certainly
were
is
out.
another factor which is was relevant to the whole battle, and that is, of course, is the US, the American Declaration of Neutrality, and that had a bearing on the whole of the battle in the sense that there was supposed to be a sort of a no hostilities zone on the coast of America, south of Canada. At the that was operative at the time, and it, shall we say, nominally at least, it, was intended as a sort of try and stop any fighting anywhere on the coast of America, south of Canada. And I'm not sure of their distance. It was quite a distance, but all American countries were signed up to it. But of course, it was an anti-German measure. And of course, although the British effectively opened the Battle of the River Plate within it, so really they were the offenders and broke again. But the American complaints to the British were pretty perfunctory. It was something that really was intended as an anti-German measure, assuredly. And the US government was sort of, normally policing a sort of no fighting zone.
Yeah, interesting.
On the whole coast of America, south of Canada.
Okay, time for a question from David Sneath, and then I'll have to ask if anybody has any more, and then we should be winding up.
No, I was fascinated by what Neil has just said, but because my father was persuaded by his father to enlist in 1941. And rather than going to the United Kingdom to do so, he sailed north from Buenos Aires to probably New York, and then by train to Toronto, and joined the Canadian Army instead. So that sort of no fight zone must have influenced the decision to travel north to Canada rather than across the Atlantic and risk U-boats in the Atlantic. So fascinating.
Indeed. Absolutely fascinating. And quite a good word to end on, I think, actually, because we've had a fascinating hour or so from Richard with rather unexpected but a delightful addition from Ruth Morton, who witnessed so much of this in Montevideo. Richard, thank you so much. I know a tremendous amount of work has gone into the preparation of this presentation, and we're very grateful to you. And the fact that 47 people have turned out to join you, I think, vindicates our idea that this would be a very interesting talk. So if you would care to unmute those of you who have not yet unmuted, and join me, please, in putting your hands together to thank Richard Holme for his excellent talk. Thank you so much, Richard.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, folks. This is the last, actually, of our current series of talks. It was just 3. It was a trial. We feel that it's gone well. So now we are going to try and assemble another 3, 4, or 5 talks for later in the winter. Not exactly sure when they will begin and end, possibly before Christmas, and then run into January or February. So watch this space for more information. Please make sure you read your FEMA Friends e-news when it comes through. Don't let it go directly into the bin, because there will be information in that. So more talks to come. These talks are open to anybody and everybody, not just members of the FEMA Friends Association. But if you'd like to join us, if this has whetted your appetite for the history and heritage of the Falklands, and you'd like to play an active role in supporting it, the Friends do a lot of very good work indeed, although I say it myself, and you'd be more than welcome to join us. So again,
I have a question about that.
one question there.
Is there a way to make a contribution? This is Jim Dawson from the United States. Is there a easy way to make a contribution?
Jim, there certainly is. I wonder if we could correspond. We have your email address. I wonder if we could get in contact to discuss that. If you or anybody else would like to make a donation, everything would be very, very gratefully received.
Yes, well, just send me the information by email then. Thank you.
Jim, thank you so much. It's been lovely to have you
By the
aboard.
way, on my way to the Falklands in October of 1967, our ship, the Darwin, cruised right over toward her, and we were within about a half a mile of what little tiny bit of the topmast was still just above the water.
And that would have been in the, do you say 67, something like that, was it?
Yeah, 67.
Yeah.
Somewhere
I made many trips on the Darwin, but the only shipwreck I ever saw was the Highland Monarch, which I suspect is long gone, but she was sitting there proudly, a little bit low in the water, but she was still there in those days. Good. So thank you ever so much, everybody. I'm just running through here to see. Jim, we will be in touch. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for joining us, and please do join us again when we have more of the FEMA Friends Zoom talks. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Graham.
Bye.
Thank you all
Okay,
very
Graham,
much.
thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
Okay.
Well, they're all still there now.
Yeah, I haven't switched us off yet, but I'm about to. Unceremoniously, very unkindly, I'm going to switch everybody off. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.